Okay, so a very warm welcome to David Walsh, who's joining us for our post-webinar recordings. And Dave, you are the owner of Open Minds Management Consultancy. So your main focus all around the areas of facilitating diversity and inclusion in the workplace. We first met over 13 years ago now, hard to believe. So rather than me prattle on about all the mad stories that I've heard from you in that time, will you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Okay, good to be here, Eilish. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm Dave Walsh. I'm from Dublin. Live here with wife and 2 kids and a dog. My working life originally, I was in the Irish police, and about 25 years ago, I happened to see somebody who was visibly distinct walking down Camden Street, and I remember thinking things are changing in Ireland. It was the time when migration had begun to become, a much bigger issue here than it had been. And but 2 weeks later, I remember thinking things are changing. When I remember seeing this man and thinking things are changing in Ireland. About 2 weeks later, there was a new Masters in Philosophy program in Trinity, in ethnic and racial studies, and I remember thinking I'd love to do it. Applied for it, was accepted. The police released me, and I went back and spent 2 years down there. The research I did was on changing Ireland. I went back to the police and I said, you had better set up a unit. This is coming. That Ireland is changing as a society. The Berlin Wall had fallen. We were kind of heading for the Celtic Tiger, so we needed people from all around the world. And there was also a kind of a massive increase at that time in, the amount of people who came here looking for asylum for various reasons. So, I always say to people, we went from this kind of very homogeneous society to about 160 nationalities in a 20-year period, and I just happened to be there when this whole thing started. So anyway, when the police said, okay, you set it up, so I created the Garda Racial and Intercultural Unit. It's now the Garda Diversity Unit, and spent some time there. Then I worked in legal practice for a short time here in Dublin, and at the same time I created or set up Open Minds, which is a diversity management consultancy. And in the past 25 years, I've been incredibly lucky. I've kind of been all over the world doing this work in Istanbul, Cairo, India, and the States, Europe, kind of all over. And I've been with, some of the world, Novartis, Coca-Cola, Apple, Hewlett-Packard, McDonald's, you name it. I've managed in some way to interact with a lot of them. So yeah, and that kind of got me to here. And one of the things that I've been also working on is around helping people who have either started businesses or are in business, because I began to realize that diversity is not, when you say the word diversity to a lot of people, the unconscious assumption is that that's about them, whoever them happen to be, different skin colors or different genders or ability or disability or whatever. And so the framework, the paradigm through which people kind of look at it can be quite limited. And what I realized over my time, it's not about them at all. It's about us. It's about me, you, the person you see in the mirror. And if you can make that shift, there are huge opportunities. Spending a lot of time working with a friend of mine, John Dempsey, who's an accountant, and he does a lot of work with people who are, establishing businesses or creating businesses. And John said to me one day, he said, I do the hard stuff. He said, I do tax and I do financing and I do, marketing. But he said, in a lot of cases, he said, people need more than just that, the hard stuff. He said, they also need help with the soft stuff. And he said, it's about recognizing themselves as entrepreneurs. It's about self-belief. It's about, visualizing where they want to go. It's about goal setting. It's about, and I said to him, really, John, it's thinking about their thinking. And he said, that's it. And he said, it is this, people need this business mindset that is not just the hard stuff, but it's also this softer stuff. And he said, in a lot of cases that it doesn't happen in the way that it should happen. So that kind of brought me, when I tied up the work I've been doing in diversity and inclusion, which is all about people, and, the work that John was doing, we found this, that the two just knitted together. And, we've been doing that work for, I don't know, 8, 9, 10 years now, and I've worked with lots of different groups of people. And I suppose that's kind of some of the conversations I've had with you
Yeah.
And I know the work that you've been doing in Griffith with ISME, and I suppose that's kind of what inspired our, conversation today.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
sharing some of those ideas, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's really valuable. I mean, I know some of the audiences you've worked with people at the early days of starting their own business, and many of the people that we had over the webinar series in the graduate business school were, well-established businesses, SMEs in Ireland, who have just been walloped, that just got this punch in the face out of nowhere with the pandemic, and are, through reasons way beyond their control, are either had to stop completely, or had to completely change the way that they're doing business. And really interesting what you're talking about there with the hard versus the soft. A lot of the focus on our webinar series was on the hard stuff, which was really important information and really beneficial to the participants. But we sensed from the emails we were getting and the feedback we were getting after every single webinar was that people need support. I want to say psychological support, maybe not that far, but emotional support in terms of their mindset and managing themselves and their teams during this time. So with that kind of audience in mind, you have a lot of experience with those kind of groups, although we're in a slightly different format today. But what would you say to any of our participants who are watching this and are just saying, I'm just not motivated, or I just don't know where to start? I've got all the resources in terms of tax subsidies and wage schemes and everything else that I have to be doing, but I just don't know where to begin.
I'd say the first thing I would say to them is this: I have this belief, and I share it with as many groups as I can and individuals as I can. Adults are just kids with mileage on the clock. In other words, it's okay to be uncertain. It's okay to be afraid. It's okay to not know where to go next. That we forget sometimes that, because we're adults, we're supposed to know everything. I remember one day, when I was in the police, one day I was a guard in Store Street. 3 days later, I was a sergeant up in Cavan. And there was no difference except that I had these 3 stripes on my shoulder. And I was, I went from a station where there was probably 500,000 people a day, going through the area, up to this small town on the border where, I think there was 2 or 3 pubs and that was it. But I was no different. But what was different was I was treated very differently. And I remember the people who were working with me, they were great people, but they came in and they were much more formal in their approach, that it wasn't Dave anymore, it was Sergeant, until they figured out who I was. But I remember they'd ask me questions about, what do I do about this or what do I do about that? And honestly, I hadn't a clue. Most of that stuff I had never come across in Dublin. But whatever it was, and I know I'm generalizing here, but us men don't tend to admit that we don't know what to do. And I know that's a big, broad, sweeping statement, but the point I'm making is that leadership can be an awful lonely space sometimes for men and women. And there's an assumption that, because I was a good guard doesn't make me a good sergeant, or because I was a good nurse doesn't make me a good nurse manager, or because I was a good HR manager doesn't necessarily make me a good director. It's a completely different world. And, excuse me, sometimes we can spend so much time focused on the task that we forget about the softer side of it, or we forget about the art of management. And to realize that, it's one human being dealing with another human being. And they both carry these huge fears and worries and uncertainties and personalities and so on. And probably what Corona or COVID has done is that it's kind of highlighted some of that. I coached a woman here last week, and she, was kind of upset, and I'm going to call it a negative state, and I'll explain this in a minute. She was in a negative state, but she said, I don't know how to manage in this situation. I knew how to manage, when things were normal. Okay, but this thing has come along and I don't know how to manage now because there are fears in my team that were never there before. I'm having to take quick decisions that I never took before. I'm having to think in a way, or to take decisions without necessarily consulting or referring or whatever it is to the people, who are impacted by these decisions. And that's creating its own stress. And, the more we went through it, I actually said to her, look, I said, do me a favor, reach into the drawer beside you there and take out the book that, you know, tells you how to do this right. And the woman said to me, I don't know if I'm doing it right. And I said, take out the book that tells you how to know you're doing this right. And she kind of looked at me, but I was teasing her, and she said, but Dave, there is no book. And I said, exactly. So why are you being so hard on yourself? That, you know, it's unprecedented. What we're dealing with now is unprecedented. And it makes me think about a time when, again, going back to my police life, I was in a unit one time called the Crime Task Force. And it was a very small unit, but it was the place to be. Everybody wanted to be in the Crime Task Force because we had the biggest cars and the fastest cars, and you could go to whatever you wanted. And, you know, it was a really great place to be, and everybody wanted to get there. It was like 24-hour Starsky and Hutch stuff, if that makes sense. And it was great. You know, you could put on the blue light and you could go wherever, and you were involved in all kinds of everything. But one of the things I realized was that blue light is brilliant, but you can't sustain it. At the end of the day, the paperwork still has to be done. And even if it doesn't have to be done, you cannot keep that level of adrenaline going over a long period of time. Eventually, you're going to burn out, okay? Or something gets missed, one or the other. Something doesn't get done the way that it should because you're so busy, you know, putting out fires. And the thing about that is that people love heroes. You know, people love, you know, the people who put out fires. Or people love, you know, the Starsky and Hutch characters on television. But what they don't see is what goes on behind all that. There's a program on television at the moment that's looking at one of the Garda districts around Dublin, and it's a great program. But it shows, you know, the front end of things. It doesn't show you really what goes on behind, you know, the mundane. And I believe that when I look at what's happening now in our little society, we're in this blue light syndrome. You know, in all kinds of organizations, we're having to stop, we're having to think, we're having to reimagine, we're having to re-engineer, we're having to think about our thinking in a way that we never did before, and it's unprecedented. You know, there is no book, there are no courses, there's nothing out there to help us to understand what do I do now. And then, as I said, put into that, you know, that there are 6 human needs identified by a woman called Chloe Madans. She's an American psychologist, and maybe we'll put them up on the screen afterwards. But one of the needs she identified is this need for certainty. You know, another one is the need for uncertainty. Why do we buy lottery tickets? Because we need a certain amount of uncertainty. She also talks about the need for, you know, meaning to life, the need for connection, the need for love. But, you know, in workplaces, we don't talk about love, you know, because you don't do that. But really, it's not about love. It's about engagement. It's about connection. And, you know, at a time like we're at now, and particularly for people in the medical arena, like it's a really, really tough time. It's a tough time for everybody, but for them, even more so, to be at the front line and have to make decisions that, you know, in this unprecedented space. And I'm deliberately using the word space because one of the things we talk about is with groups of people that there's a fantastic talk on YouTube by a woman called Heidi Schleifer. I'm sure we can put up a link to it afterwards. But Heidi Schleifer, she's a family therapist, and she says the space between 2 parents is the playground of the child. So I'll give your listeners a second just to think about that. The space between 2 parents is the playground of the child. In other words, if it's a sacred space, then the child grows up rich. You know, emotionally, physically, intellectually, spiritually, the child grows up rich. If it's not a sacred space, then there's all kinds of issues in that space. And I think that, you know, we can apply the same thing to our workspaces. That we have to imagine, and you know, we live in this space. And at the moment, the space is all over the place. The spaces that we took for granted, you know, the physical space that is Griffith College, or, you know, is Open Minds, or, you know, the spaces of any of the people from the organizations on this call, you know, we operated in a space that we could control. We're now operating in spaces that, A, they're no longer physical spaces in the way that they were, and B, they're very different emotional spaces in that there's massive uncertainty. you know, things we took for granted about being able to communicate face to face, about taking decisions, about, you know, the profits next year, about, you know, all the things that we took for granted, they're gone out the window. And yet we're having to manage in that new space, and we're having to reimagine. So one of the things, you know, to go back to your question, people are saying, I'm worried, I'm apprehensive. There's nothing wrong with that. There would be something wrong if they weren't. I think it was Seth Godin, I get his podcast most days, but one of the things he said was, if you're doing ordinary now, you're at the greatest risk. In other words, if you haven't stopped to reimagine what you're doing, then you're probably at the greatest risk, because, you know, I think it was Simon Sinek I was listening to earlier on said, we're going back to abnormality. We're not going back to normality. There is no normality compared, you know, no, there will be a new normality, you know, and we will create that. So it's about now thinking, you know, conceptualizing the space that we're all in. And, you know, I know on this call there's going to be people from lots of different backgrounds, but conceptualizing that space. Now, what happens in the space? What are the relationships between the people in the space? Bearing in mind that, you know, the 6 human needs that we took for granted have been turned on their heads. How is it that we now think about, how do I create, recreate, reimagine that in a new way? I'm going to change the backdrop here in a little while to show your listeners. It's one that I use. So I was just saying to you there that, you know, we need to reimagine, we need to rethink, you know, about the spaces. So the first thing, and like you were saying to me about helping people with this, the first thing is to reimagine your space, to think about the space and what this new space means. And again, you know, I did a virtual call with somebody earlier this week, and I just made the point, it's the first time in my life that on a work call, I was invited into somebody's home. If that ordinarily, when, you know, when we would be coaching, facilitating, whatever, or as a manager, if I'm giving feedback or on planning or whatever, it's done in the space that is, you know, Griffith College or whatever company I happen to work. It's done in that physical space. And, you know, I bring what I am into the space. But all of a sudden, I realized last week, I've actually been invited into this person's home to do the call that we were doing. And I came off the call and it just hit me. I noticed that they had a decoration in their home that was very similar to the one that we have here. And I remarked on it. And I said, you know, same as whatever. We talked for, I think, a minute. Mickey Mouse conversation about whatever. But I came off the call and I realized, you know, I need to be really careful about that when I enter somebody's virtual space, and we are doing that now in a way that is unprecedented, what am I noticing in that person's space that I could be judging, that I could be picking up, you know, that it could be impacting me as a bias? In other words, you know, I don't know, it could be a piece of artwork, it could be a religious symbol, it could be, you know, maybe kids in the background who are crying because mommy or daddy are busy doing whatever they're doing on the call. And, you know, am I judging them? You know, either they should be going looking after the kids, or am I judging them saying, how could they let the kids interfere with work? Or, you know, the point I'm making is that as a human being, it was the first time that I stopped and went, wow, I need to think about my unconscious prejudices or my unconscious bias and how that, you know, has come home in a way that we never thought about before. You know, before we thought about this in the physical workspace. Now I realize that part of this new world is that we're invited into people's spaces and we're getting access to people in an environment that we probably never got before. And how is that impacting the way I see them, the way I judge them, and so on. So again, it's just a side issue, but, you know, we were saying about the changes that it's made.
Yeah.
But if you look behind me, and I'll move over slightly, I'd love your listeners, okay, the people watching this video, to look at what I have up there and to think about how they feel as they look at that. So let's do it with you, Eilish, okay? As you look at those pictures, tell me what comes into your head.
Oh, happiness. It makes you smile.
Okay, what memories does it bring back?
Oh, it brings back memories of, yeah, watching movies with my brother or trips to the cinema with the family, just joy, isn't it, really?
So what's going on inside? Physically, what's going on inside you now?
Oh, happiness,
Okay,
positivity.
great. So if I said to you, you're in a good state right now, would that be an okay observation?
Yeah, I'm in a good state, yeah.
A good state. So let's call it state. And I always say to people, you know that expression, look at the state of it. Okay, it's a real Irish expression, but look at the state of it. And usually when we hear it, you know, it's kind of negative. It's that, you know, maybe you've been in the pub late the night before and, you know, around you hear my wife will say to me, look at the state of you. But when I talk about states in the context of what we're doing here, I'm talking about what's happening in my head and how is that affecting my physiology. In other words, the pictures in my head, how are they affecting how I feel as a human being? So, you know, we think in pictures, and if I say to you, don't think about a pink elephant, you know, that old, the old exercise, don't think about a pink elephant. What happens? You think about a pink elephant. Why? Because the human mind can't deal in negatives. So when we're saying to somebody, don't do something, in order to process that command, they have to actually think about what it is that we're telling them not to think about. Why is this important? Because if we're saying to our children, don't be bold, where are we focusing their energy? On what we don't want. Okay? And we wonder why they're bold in. And the workplace is no different. That, you know, if we're focused people on what we don't want, well, guess what? That's what they're going to be thinking about. Okay. But if we were to if we focus people on what we do want. So if we're saying to our, you know, to our children, don't be bold, to process that command, what do they have to do? They have to think about being bold. And then we wonder why that's where their energy goes. But if we say to them, you know, I love it when you clean your bedroom. I love it when you have your dinner or clean up after your dinner. I love it when you, so we focus them on what we want. Well, guess what? That's probably what we're going to get to. So the words that we use, the pictures that we create in other people's heads are crucial. I just got you to look at the pictures of Disney, but what it did was it brought you back to great memories. It brings you back to, you know, being with your family, being a child or whatever. And it got you into what we call a good state. Now, if we're to get through what we're dealing with right now, one of the things we've got to, as we reimagine the space, we've also got to think about what energy do I put into the space. So as a manager, as a leader, you know, whatever I happen to be, when I arrive into that space, how do I show up? Okay, and it doesn't matter whether we're starting a business or, you know, we're dealing with an existing business. How do I show up? And my experience, my behavior, my attitudes, whatever, when I show up in that space, how is that impacting the people who are already in the space? Remember, you know, I said to you, there's a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of worry, there's a lot of concern. What is it that if I did it or said it or believed it or, you know, displayed it would help to improve the states of people in the space? And that for me is a real opportunity now. That, yeah, you know, as Viktor Frankl told us, Viktor Frankl was a Jewish psychiatrist who was a prisoner in Auschwitz. And one of the things he said was, you know, he said, every day I watch bodies go into ovens. And he said, I realized, you know, they were neighbors, friends, family. And he said, I wondered when was going to be my turn. And he said, then I had a realization. The guards could beat me, rape me, strip me, humiliate me. They could do anything they wanted. But he said, the one last great freedom that he said, I realized I had was that no matter what they did, I could choose to either love them or hate them. In other words, the last great freedom that we as human beings have is that no matter what happens between stimulus and response is our golden freedom to choose. And Stephen Covey took it and built it into the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. You know, that idea of between stimulus and response is our freedom to choose. So again, going back to your question, the idea of leaders or, you know, the people on the call thinking about the space. What is this new space, first of all? What do I bring to the space? Because my state impacts the people in the space. In other words, how I show up as a parent, as a leader, whatever, that's impacting the people in the space. And I said to you earlier on about the lady who had said to me, I don't know if I'm doing the right thing. There is no right thing right now, but that's what we're bringing to the space. So how do we step in and help our leaders to be okay with uncertainty right now? And what can they do to make more certainty out of this uncertainty? So going back to our picture here, it took me all of, you know, a minute to get you into a positive state. And all I did was bring you back to, you know, something that you associated in your head with positive times. So it's not difficult to do it. But what's important is a consciousness of the need to do it. The need to be aware that it's not all about the hard stuff, it's the soft stuff as well. It's the art of management. And how do I get people into this positive state? And it's almost developing new habits. So the reason I put those pictures up was all of those pictures have something in common. What is it that they have in common? They all came from the mind of one man. They all started in Walt Disney. Now, he didn't necessarily develop the idea of the Pirates of the Caribbean, but he did develop the idea of fun, of something different. You know, he came up with the idea of giving human features to animals and turning them into Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck and people that, you know, generations of us have come to love. So to this day, Disney World, and I'm sure some of your listeners have been there, Disney World to this day train what they call Imagineers. And the job of an Imagineer is to look at what exists and to reimagine, or to re-engineer, or to rethink, or to come up with something that influences the states of people. Because what one of us doesn't get excited when we think about Disney World? So if we're to do the same thing, how do we become reimagineers now around our businesses? How do I, you know, realize that it's about my mindset? It's what Viktor Frankl said. We can't do anything about Corona. Okay, we either live fighting it, or we begin to learn to live around it. Okay, and to live with it, and to say, okay, at some stage, you know, it will get solved. But in the meantime, how are we reimagining what it is that we have? How are we reimagining our people? How are we reimagining what we do, so that we can meet the needs, you know, of our client base, which is still there, but maybe in a different way? So to go back to your original point, there's nothing wrong with feeling uncertain right now. It is uncertain times. What's important is that we say, okay, but how am I reacting? What's going on in the space right now? And that's the area that I think a lot of people need help with. This idea of, you know, just finding someone, you know, somewhere like Griffith that's putting on these programs at the moment to say, you're not on your own. You know, because it is a lonely space at the moment too. You know, we're out there on our own and we've nowhere really to interact with people. This is a fantastic opportunity for people to come together, to conceptualize and to think about, you know, okay, the space. What is my space? The mindset's in the space. What is my mindset? How am I showing up as a leader? You know, how am I showing up as, you know, a person who's influencing the people in that space? Am I creating possibilities? Am I coming up with new? Am I encouraging them to come up with new ideas? And at one time, when I was in the police, we happened to be going down by the River Liffey one day, down by the Guinness's Gates again. And any of your listeners who are from Dublin will know what I'm talking about. And a woman had decided to jump into the River Liffey, that she wanted to end her life. But when she was in there, she decided she didn't want to end her life, that she wanted to be rescued. We happened to be going by and we got waved down. And of course, me being the youngest in the car and probably the one who was the best swimmer, I ended up in the water. And I will never forget the cold in the water that day. It was unbelievably freezing, even though it was an October day and the sun was shining, but it was freezing. And I remember trying to hold on to the woman, and very quickly, all the energy in me disappeared. But she was kind of pulling me down, and the chap with me, Jim Furlong, I remember saying, Jim, he had a life buoy down to me, and I was trying to say to him, pull it tighter, because I couldn't hold her and I couldn't hold me up. But when I went to say the words to him, to Jim, pull it tighter, the words literally wouldn't come out of my mouth. I couldn't talk, even though I knew I wanted to say something, it wouldn't come out. So thank God, you know, everything worked out. And I remember saying to a doctor afterwards when they took us up, you know, why couldn't I wanted to talk and I couldn't. And he said, your unconscious mind took over. Its job is to keep you safe. That's what it's designed to do. And he said, at that moment, you didn't need energy to talk. You needed energy in your heart, your lungs, and your brain. And he said, that's, you know, your unconscious took over, and that's where it put your energy. And he said, it shut off the need to talk. So I always say to, you know, I'm talking to people in organizations or managers, I say, how much control did I have that day over what happened to me? And the answer is almost none. But I had gone into what's called the limbic brain state. In other words, this prehistoric brain state that every one of us human beings have. The over 7 billion of us, we share this in common. When we're in trouble, when we're panicked, you know, when something goes wrong, it's the fight or flight mechanism. Our unconscious takes over and it, you know, puts us into this protective space. And that's why we, lived in villages and communities and caves and so on. Here, historically, that's how we kept safe. Today, we still have the same facility. We can still fire off panic. We can still fire off adrenaline, and our heart rates can go up and we worry. And we can end up in this limbic brain state very easily in an organization. In other words, it's a state. So depending on the experiences that I'm having in the space, it can put me into a negative space or a positive space. But the point is, I had no control over what happened in the river that day. Over 94% of everything that we human beings do on a day-to-day basis is unconscious behavior. We do it without even realizing that we're doing it. We're running habits over and over and over again. Some of them are really positive, but some of them can be quite destructive. And right now, one of the opportunities for people is to say, okay, as I reimagine the space, as I reimagine how I think in the space and the states that I'm creating in people, what new habits would I have to create if I was to make this space a better space? So one example might be, could I adopt Frankel's approach? Could I say that this thing has happened? There's not much I can do about it, but I definitely can do something about the way I'm thinking about it. To recognize that I'm a human being, and yet it's okay to be uncertain. It's not okay to wallow in uncertainty and to do nothing about it. That's the opportunity where we sit back and say, what can I do different? So again, here's an example of that I use sometimes with people when I'm working with them. If I say to you, Eilish, I want you to go back in your head, to go back to school. And I want you to get that teacher for me. That one, the one I'm talking about. Get that teacher for me. And all of your listeners do exactly the same thing as you're listening to this. Wherever you are right now, just take a second, sit back, get that teacher in your head. And I want you to imagine, excuse me, you've come into work, into school, and you're late. And the teacher's waiting for you, and they say, why are you late for school today? So tell me, Eilish, what's going on in your head? As you relive that experience, what's going on?
Yeah, just that feeling of dread, the anxiety, and the knot in your stomach of what am I going to say? How am I going to explain it?
The state you're in right now, positive or negative?
Oh, negative.
How long did it take me to get you there?
20 seconds, 10 seconds. How long did it take you to say that teacher?
What tools did I have?
Just your words.
Okay. Now, I said that teacher. I didn't say whether I meant good or bad. You decided that.
Yeah.
In other words, you received information from me, and you're the one who decided what that teacher meant. Does that make sense? Okay. So, I want you to do the same for me again. Okay. I want you to go back to school again. Okay. Go on. Go back.
Yeah.
And all your listeners do the same. Go back. And I want you to get that teacher again. You come into school, he or she is waiting for you. You're late. They greet you. They meet you in the corridor. What made you late for school today? Now go inside and tell me what's happening.
Well, now I suppose I'm just a little bit calmer. I don't know if that's just because I've had time to think about the scenario. Okay,
great. So let me just ask you this. Is it the same experience that you had a minute ago, or is it a different experience?
No, it's not as bad.
Okay, so is it fair to say it's a more positive experience than it was a minute ago?
Yeah, definitely not as anxious or as worrying.
Okay, so what's really going on here, okay? I've just influenced you twice as a human being in the past couple of minutes. Each time I put you into a state. The first one was a more negative state. The second one was a more positive state. So if I was a manager giving you feedback or having a discussion with you, which state would you prefer to be in? The first one or the second one?
The second one. I mean, it's not ideal. You're still late, but definitely the stress levels weren't as bad.
Okay, so now what did I do that made the two states different? What was different?
I don't know. Was it just the time?
Okay, now I want all of your listeners to think about this as well, because if you're doing this right, you should be having the same experience. What happened was the first time I said, why are you late for school? The second time I said, what made you late for school? Now, you picked that up unconsciously. You didn't process that consciously. You processed it unconsciously. But what went on inside your head?
That's not
Positive or negative state? You
yeah,
went into this
not as
limbic
personal.
brain reaction, or you went into a prefrontal reaction. In other words, you know, if we think about our children, we think about great times, we think about, you know, Disney World, we have this prefrontal experience. You know, it's love, connection. It's the part of my brain that, you know, I don't need to be defensive. But if I'm in limbic, then I'm just trying to keep safe. Okay, I'm resistant, I'm just trying to keep safe. Now, the question for your listeners is, as a leader, as an organizer, as, you know, a manager, how am I showing up? And the words that flow from my mouth, okay, or from my mind, what states do they create in the space? Because in 2 minutes, I've just showed you how powerful language can be when it comes to influencing states in people. If I say to you, use your mind for a change. Again, when would you normally hear that expression? Use your mind for a change. You know, most people will associate the school report coming in the front door and the parents saying, use your mind for a change, or a teacher saying. Same sentence, only slightly different. Use your mind for change. What's the difference? One letter.
One letter.
The letter A. Using your mind for a change means there's a presupposition that you don't use your mind effectively. Use your mind for change, there's a presupposition that we can do something much more positive. Now, what's this got to do? So the people on your call here who are listening to this and they're saying, well, how can I use this? They're what's called language patterns. So how can I use a language pattern effectively? Let me give you an example. I have people in some of our classes who are thinking, you know, there's no point asking the bank manager for a loan. They won't give you a loan, and, you know, things are not the way they were, and so on and so on. We go to the bank manager and we ask for a loan, and the bank manager says no, or the credit union manager says no, I can't give you a loan. If we say to them, why will you not give me a loan, or why not? What state does that put the bank manager in? Unconsciously, probably in a negative space, and they're defensive. If we say to them, what do I have to do to get the loan the next time? Now what's the difference? There's a presupposition that I'm going to get the loan, but I need you to help me to figure out what I need to do to get it the next time. So now they're much more likely to say, well, you know, you need a better credit reference, or you need a better business plan, or whatever it would be. But there's a presupposition that I'm going to come back again. And if it's not right the next time, you still say, what do I need the next time? Or what do I need to get this loan the next time? But there's a much greater chance that you will influence the bank manager into moving into a relationship with you to get the loan, than if you say, why will you not give me the loan? Why will just create defensiveness? Why in a human being? Why did you not do the report? Why did you not get the project ready? It'll create defensiveness, which is exactly what happened in you. What is it? What happened that you couldn't finish the report? Dave, I don't have the experience, or Dave, I didn't have the time, or Dave, in other words, we're getting to the reason. It's not personal. Another language pattern, Eilish, you never get this done. You know, you never get this finished when I ask you. Okay, what's going to happen? You is going to make you defensive. Eilish, I notice that you're struggling with getting this finished. What can I do? Okay. I've taken out the word you, and, you know, I've replaced it with what I'm noticing, not what's going on for you. I'm not prejudging you. I'm saying to you, this is what I've noticed. Again, I've influenced Eilish's state. So to go back to our question, it's about reimagining the space. It's about thinking about the energy that I'm bringing to the space now as a leader. It's doing Viktor Frankl, and it's saying there's nothing I can do about what's happened. That is a fact. But what I can do is to think about my thinking now in the space, to realize that a lot of what's happening is unconscious behavior. The lady who said to me, I don't know if I'm doing the right thing, okay, was probably running habits that she had run before. They had been very successful up until now, but we're not in normal now. So we now have to come up with new habits. And what I'm going to do now is stop for a second, and I'm going to show you about the habits.
So Dave, you were talking there about, you know, looking at the space and looking at what you're doing and where we are now, and that, you know, people might need to change habits or form new habits. What, can you explain a little bit more about that and what that means?
Yeah, sure. One, you know, I met a man about 15, 20 years ago who had a huge influence on me and the way I think. And he's the man who designed the logo for Open Minds. His name was Phil Walsh. He's no relation, but Phil, unfortunately, has passed on. Unfortunately for me, because I miss some of his thinking. But he encouraged me to go and to study what's called Neuro-Linguistic Programming, or NLP. And NLP is the study of our subjective experiences. What goes on in our heads, how does language influence that, and how does that affect our physiology? So, we've already talked about states. I don't need to explain this anymore. You get that. But one of the approaches NLP takes is to say, look, can we develop new habits? Can I, unconsciously we're running strategies. They're called strategies. We run strategies from the time we're young. And, sometimes they're very useful. Sometimes as we get older, they're not so useful. So can we develop new habits? And one of the techniques I use with people is what I'm about to show you. So if I said to you, Eilish, pick up your pen for me and write your name. And all of your listeners do exactly the same thing. Pick up a piece of paper, just write your name. Done?
Yeah.
Okay. 0, that's the simplest thing I've done all day. 10, that was really difficult. Give me a number. In other words,
0.
How much energy did it take to do what you've just done?
None, really.
0. And you're looking at me much as to say, what is this fool on about? I'm just writing my name. Okay. Great. So the reason that it's so easy for you to do, that's an unconscious habit. You don't even think about it anymore. When you were a child, you had to think about, how do I make A, B, C, D? Then the teacher said you have to join it up, and it became even more difficult. But you persevered and you kept going, and you learned how to write your name. So today, Eilish does that without even thinking about it. In the same way that Eilish gets up in the morning, she doesn't have to think about how to brush her teeth, how to get dressed, how to put her foot into her shoe, how to put the spoon into her mouth with the cornflakes. All of that stuff happens unconsciously, because if we had to concentrate on everything, we'd crack up, but we don't. So what we human beings do is we delete, we distort, and we generalize. And I'll come back to those in a second. So what we human beings do in order to make sense of the world, there's 11 million bits of information coming at us. As we sit here now, there's 11 million bits of information. The temperature, the visuals, I'm having to absorb everything. I'm having to talk, I'm having to concentrate, heart has to keep beating, and so on and so on and so on. But if we had to do all those things consciously, we'd overload and we'd crack up. So we don't. We reduce it down to small chunks of information. So why is there 7 digits in your phone number? Why is there 8 digits in your bank account? It's called the power of 7. And Phil Walsh, the man I told you about, his company originally was called the power of 7. Human beings remember somewhere between 5 and 9 chunks of information. Okay, so it's called the power of 7. 7 plus or minus 2 pieces of information. We remember chunks. So that's why there's no point trying to study where you're cramming vast amounts of information. It's not going to stick. Chunk it down into small pieces and it's much more likely to stick. So that's a habit. Chunking is a habit, learning how to do things in a different way. In the same way that writing your name is a habit that Eilish did for me without even thinking about it. It took no energy, no focus, and you were able to do it without thinking about it. Mm-hmm. You've developed what we call the neural network in your head for writing your name. You make a conscious decision to write, your unconscious takes over, and can you imagine the millions of actions that have to happen in perfect synchronicity for you to write that name, but you do it perfectly every time? It's an unconscious habit. Now, put your pen in your other hand. And everybody else on the call, put your pens in your weak hand now. And go ahead and write your name. 0, it's the simplest thing I've done all day. 10, that was much more difficult. Where are you now?
It wasn't much more difficult. It wasn't quite a 10, but it was probably, a 5 or a 6. It was probably...
Okay, brilliant. So it was different to the other experience a minute ago. So it took more energy, it took more focus, and so on. Now, if I said to you, you were only to write with that hand for the next month, describe the next month for me.
It'll be hell.
What's the problem? It's the same name and the same brain that wrote, a minute ago. So how could it be so difficult for you?
Yeah, imagine the concentration and the effort. Although I'm not writing too much at the moment because I'm not.
Yeah, okay. Well,
Because
you know, but
we're
you're to
in our
do your
online
copy with
lives.
your
So
weak hand, and you're to, you know, everything you do with your strong hand, you're to do it with your weak hand.
yeah, no, a nightmare.
Nightmare.
Yeah.
Okay.
All of your effort, all of your energy, as you say, will be just gone on performing simple tasks.
Okay. So side issue, that's what it's like when we ask people to have change their habits overnight to fit in. Okay, so that should give us a sense of what's happening in the space. When we're saying to people, you know, you have to do things in a new way, that's how difficult it can be. So there's your uncertainty. And pile on to top of that other uncertainty, and you can imagine the state that it's put you in right now. So if I said to you, think about writing like that for the next month, it's not doing it, it's even thinking about it, that's the problem. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thinking about it. Okay, so again, this is what happens in the space. So again, the reason that it's so difficult is that you haven't built the neural network. That's the problem here. You haven't got the program in your head for writing your name that way. Now, here's the good news. Could you learn to write with both hands? Could you, or could any of you on this call learn to write with your both hands in the same way? Yeah?
Probably could.
You could, yeah, sure. How long does it take a human being to develop new habits? 21 to 28 days to build the neural network. After that, it's practice, practice, practice. But most people won't stick it. The brain is designed to do the thing that takes the least amount of energy. So when we just set out to create new habits around diet or, you know, sport or whatever, how long do we stick it? I mean, you know, this is Ireland. Look at the churches for the first month or the first week in Lent, or, you know, everybody's given. How long does it last? 10, 12 days, and then, well, you know, okay, we give up. Okay. So what's really important here is we need to think about our thinking. So how do we reimagine getting these new habits? So in the space, it's about learning to write in a different way, learning to create new habits, and writing with your weaker hand is just an example. But here's what else has to be there. It's not enough to just say, I want to do it. Okay. We also need a motivation. So again, what are leaders doing right now in the space to increase motivation? Or in other words, the psychological connection. I'm doing it because I want to do it. So if I said to you, Eilish, I'm going to lose weight. Okay, I'm losing weight, I'm losing weight, I'm losing weight. I go into my wife and I say, Grania, I'm losing weight. Tell me about the process of losing weight. What do I have to do to lose weight?
Eat less, move more.
What do you mean eat less? No more Chinese.
Maybe give them a miss for a little while.
No more Dominoes. Next thing you're going to say walking and jogging and...
Yeah, move more. Eat less, move more.
You're going to say no more Carlsberg, aren't you?
Possibility.
Right. Even thinking about the thinking, even thinking about the process, never mind the doing, how am I already feeling?
Negative.
Positive or negative state?
Right. Yeah, positive. Negative state.
Okay, and what's going to happen? Monday. I'll start Monday. I promise. I procrastinate and I push it off into the future. Okay, now I want you to do something for me. Sit back in your chair and close your eyes. And all of your listeners do exactly the same thing. Just sit back for a second, close your eyes. I want you in your head to go back to the last time that you were super amazing me. You were the fittest, trimmest, most energetic, vibrant ever version of you. You were in control of you in a brilliant way. See what you saw, hear what you heard, feel what you felt when you were super amazing me. You could play 90 minutes of a match and score 26 goals if you wanted. You could run whatever length you wanted, no problem. You were physically, mentally, spiritually, absolutely in control of you. The best ever version of you. See what you saw, hear what you heard, feel what you felt when you were super amazing you. And come back, give yourself a number. 0, it's a terrible feeling. 10, it's a great feeling. And come on back out, Eilish. Now, what number do you have?
Oh, 10.
Brilliant. Now, hopefully your listeners are doing the same thing, okay? Now, which of these is more motivating? I come home tonight, I look out, I know I have to do a 5-kilometer walk because I'm losing weight, but it's lashing rain. How motivated am I to go out?
Probably not much.
Monday. I'll start Monday, I promise. I come home tonight, I look out, it's lashing rain, I know I have to do a 5-kilometer walk or run or whatever, but I'm getting back to super amazing me. Now how motivated am I to go out?
You know, much more positive, I'd say.
What's the difference? The process is exactly the same. What's the difference?
You're emphasizing the outcome rather than the negatives. Not what you're giving up, it's what you're going to gain.
It's the visualization. And again, to go back to your question, what pictures are leaders painting in people's heads right now? You know, super amazing me. It's just a metaphor for you at your best as a manager, as a parent, as a student, you know, a manager, a director, it really doesn't matter. But you at your best, what would you be doing? What would you be saying? What pictures would you be creating in people's heads that would inspire them to get involved in developing these new habits? So if we keep doing what we've always done, as Einstein said, what are we going to get? The same outcomes. Can we carry that into the future? No, because the future is different. We're reimagining. As Walt Disney said, we're reimagining the future. In Irish business and in Irish industry, we're now reimagining when we come out of this thing. And we're already on the way out, you know, as we move through it, because we are moving through it. Like, you know, our history, I think it was Simon Sinek earlier on who said, you know, we've come through, you know, if we lived for 1,000 years, imagine the amount of adversity we would face. But one thing is for sure, we will come through it. Nothing sure. That's what we do. We survive and we will come through this. But when we come through it, what will I be doing that's different to the way that I've been doing it up until now that will make sure that we survive? You know, our organization survives. The person or the organization with the greatest flexibility is the one who's most likely to survive. And never was there more need for flexibility than now. There's a great, if you look at people, there's a great, I don't know what the right word is, camaraderie, companionship, I don't know, call it what you want, but you know, there's something new has emerged here. You know, I've been years looking at diversity, and as I said, most people think it's about them, but now there's a recognition, no, it's not, it's about me. There's Gallup research that shows a manager's commitment to the diversity of his or her team is the #1 driver of engagement. Never more than now do we need to be looking and saying, how can I reimagine my relationship with the people around me? Because we're all in this, you know, as Tomás McGuckin would say, Lekela, you know, we're in it together. We're going through this thing together. How do we create a space that, you know, is a workspace that is reimagined, that I see it in a new way, but that coming to that space means I go home to my home space and I can reimagine that too. In other words, that I'm learning in this living learning organization that we, you know, we need to grow as. Because those are the organizations that will come out of this, the ones who can reimagine, the ones with the flexibility of thinking, the ones who can look and do as Frankel said, it's happened, I can't do anything about that, but I can definitely shape what I'm going to do about it. The Walt Disneys, the ones who are able to, can I reimagine, you know, my people, the assets, the organization that I have, you know, can I reimagine how I can do that, but in a different way? And that is about creating new habits. But it's about a visualization of what that new habit would mean. I was learning one time to drive a police motorcycle, and I really didn't like driving them. But one of the things they do, for any of your listeners who've ever driven motorcycles, they push you into what they call a speed wobble. And a speed wobble happens only when the bike is going really fast. The intuitive thing to do is to brake when this happens. It's counterintuitive. The way to get through a speed wobble is to go faster. And once you go faster, you know, in the wobble, the back of the bike starts to go all over the road. But when you go faster, it streamlines and it straightens up and the bike just continues. And once you've done it once, it's like stretching yourself. It's almost like doing the bungee jump, you know, or flying or doing something that you're afraid to do. But once you do it, you look back and say, you know, what was the big problem? You've stretched yourself. And anyway, I'm going around the bend in Carrickmacross one day. We're on this bike and they were pushing us. And one of the things they teach you is to look at the furthest point on the road. Because if you look at the furthest point on the road, you have, you know, 6, 7, whatever seconds to react to the dog or whatever is on the road. But where do most people look when they're driving? Here. Okay, so I'm going around the bend, pushing fast, and I'm looking at this big old oak tree on the left-hand side of the road. Where does my unconscious think I want to go? Into the tree. And where do they end up? In the tree. In other words, the message I sent back was what I didn't want. And what happens, it doesn't know the difference between real and imagined. It thinks I want to go there. So what does it do? It pushes me in that direction, and I ended up on the tree. The bike got smashed up and I got smashed up. I should have got killed, but I didn't, thank God. But I got what I focused on. Now, what has that got to do with the space right now? What are we focused on? What habits of thinking are we running? Are we focused on what we don't want? I don't want to fail my exams. I don't want to get into trouble. Or are we focused on what I do want? I want to do really well. I want to get an A, or I want to get a distinction, or I want to get... so again, in the space, it's about the habits of thinking. The words that come out of us, I've already showed you this with the language one, the words that come out paint pictures in people's heads. What visualization am I painting? Is it what we're going to focus on and where we're going to go, or is it what we don't want? Again, I often say to people, for any of your listeners who play golf, you know, you're about to take a shot, and just before you hit your shot, you've lined up and you know, it's a par three, I'm going to get down there. First shot's going to put me on the green, and they can visualize this perfectly. The great golfers will know what I'm talking about. You can visualize this perfectly. It's just 2 feet short of the pin. But just before you hit, I say, Eilish, mind the trees on the right. Now where's the ball going?
The trees on the right.
But why? I told you not to go there.
Yeah.
Because the last picture in your head was the trees on the right. So what does your unconscious think you want? The trees on the right. What's it going to do to your physiology? It's probably going to shift and send you there, unless you're really good. Okay. But I'm using these examples to say to people, you focus on what you want, not on what you don't want. It's like saying to the children, don't be bold. What pictures are we painting in their heads? Don't be bold. You know, I love it when. And I always say to people, I wrote a piece recently where I say, you know, inclusion in an organization, it's almost talking about love. But I said to you earlier on, we don't talk about love in workplaces. I mean, there's certainly no lectures in Griffith College on love in organizations. But right now, we probably do need to talk about love. And I don't mean it in the sense that, you know, the traditional sense. What I mean is we need to begin to talk to our people by saying, I love it when. I love it, Eilish, when you and I get to do this conversation. I love it thinking that, you know, people will get to look at this. And I love thinking that they will get inspired maybe by taking some of these ideas. And I love to think that they will be able to use that to help you know, their people. I love to think that they will be able to reimagine or to apply some of these ideas. So when I say, you know, engagement is about love, that's what I mean. It's about, you know, it's this appreciative focus on what is it that we're doing well. You know, despite everything that's happening, what are we doing well, and can we make more of that happen? And the only way we're going to find that out is by talking to our people. Never, you know, were relationships more important than they are right now. We've done the hard stuff. We've done the finance, we've done the marketing, that we can do. Okay, but it's also now looking at this other piece that says, these are my people. This is my space. These are the people in my space. And the job of a leader is to make a safe space. And I don't mean just physically safe, I mean emotionally safe, a place where people say, I love going there. I love being there because they have your back. I love being there because they visualize. I love being there because they focus on what we want, not on what we don't want. I love being there because, yes, this thing has happened, but I will look back in time and remember, wow, remember what happened in our space when this thing happened? Remember what made us different to, you know, other organizations? And it's the leadership mindset. It's, you know, it's Disney. It's this idea of reimagining what's happening and creating something more, you know, newer and vibrant and energetic that will carry into the future.
Now, I think what you've captured today, Dave, and we probably have talked longer than we planned on, but that's what generally happens once we get going. But I think what you've captured is something that came up throughout the webinar series as the key theme. What we got in every single one, whether we were talking tax, accounting, marketing, it didn't matter what the actual subject area was. From the comments and queries and engagement, what we got was that community, that relationship focus, and that sense that we are in really uncertain times, but we're all in it together, and we have this opportunity to reflect. And I think what you've given is a toolkit, really, or a selection of ideas. And I know you've got loads more and loads of other things which we might point people towards some resources afterwards as well. but it's giving those kind of tools or methods to apply to try and strengthen how we think about our thinking and how we
absolutely. And there's a
things.
great a coach I often listen to, Michael Neal, and he uses this example. You know, if a stick is floating down a river, a branch is floating down a river, and it gets stuck on either side of the river, it doesn't need years of therapy to get it free. It needs a gentle nudge. And right now, you know, I believe that there are lots of us who just need gentle nudges. And if this conversation is a gentle nudge to people, brilliant. I love that idea. You know, but it is, it's just, you know, in the past hour, we've talked about, you know, we've gently moved through a number of key areas, the idea of space, thinking about our space, you know, thinking about our thinking in the space, thinking about the states we create. How do I show up? Because my state is directly affecting the others in the state, in the states in the space. Then how do we, the power of language to influence the states of people. The idea of focusing on what we want, not on what we don't want in the space. The idea of recognizing limbic and prefrontal, you know, the brain states that we put people into, you know, how they're feeling emotionally, and what can I do? Not, you know, why am I doing what I'm doing, but what can I do? That conversation when we're saying to people, what can we do? One of the presuppositions of NLP is that everybody has all the resources they need inside themselves. They just need help to get at them. We all have the resources. There's, you know, none of us are broken. There's nothing missing. We're not wrong. It's there. We just need help to get at it. And there's another great metaphor that we use, that the map is not the territory. You know, the human being, the human mind loves patterns. That's why we have menus. That's why we have maps. That's why we, you know, they make it easy for us. And people, you know, create maps in their heads. So the example I sometimes use, you're sitting in a doctor's surgery. What map is in your head? Well, you practically have your funeral organized. You know, you're sitting waiting for results of exams to come in. What's happened? Well, I failed. There's no two ways about it. I failed. But then you go in and see the doctor, and the doctor says, oh, yeah, everything's okay. You know, your cholesterol's up a bit. You need to do something about that. And you come out and you go, oh. Or the results come in and you did a lot better than you thought you were going to do. Or the map is not the territory. In other words, the map is what we create in our heads. The reality is always different. And right now, the job of leaders is to go into this space and create effective maps for people, or help them to create more effective maps. We're all worried, we're all uncertain, we're all concerned. But simply by using things like what and why, you change the map. The bank manager's map was changed simply by saying, what do I need to do to get it the next time? And you minimize resistance. So that idea of, you know, space, states, thinking about our thinking, our language, focused on what we want, not on what we don't want, focused on the idea of, can I help, can I create new habits? Yes. Focused on the idea of relationships in this time, and saying to ourselves, you know, I will come out of this, and we will come out of this stronger. And that, I think, is a huge opportunity. There's no, you know, it's easy for me to sit here and say, but it is, if we look at it as an opportunity and say, we will come out of it. You know, and it's just what we do as people right now, that's what's going to make the difference.
Yeah, brilliant.
I'm
David,
delighted to share this with your with all your listeners, Eilish, and with you. And if it's a thing that I can do anything more, diversity.ie, or use my contact details or whatever, I'm more than happy to follow up with anybody. Probably what we'll do, I think you and I, is try and pull this into some kind of a document or some kind of a something that we can give to people.
Yeah, absolutely. What we'll do is populate the additional resources section on the website, and put up something with the videos as well. Okay. So we finished on that note. David Walsh, Open Minds Consultancy, thank you so much. And as you said, welcome. If anybody wants to check out more information, you can go to diversity.ie, but we put all the details. If they've
questions, Eilish, out of this, because I know it's not interactive, so but if people have questions, let them email you or whatever, or ring, you know, please share, you know, I have no problem. People can contact me and I'll do whatever I can. But
that's brilliant.
I'll finish by saying I loved being on here today.
I loved doing this session with you, Dave. Thank you so much.
Okay, Eilish, God bless. Mind yourself. Bye.